Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into one of the most famous poems ever written, but we're going to uncover a secret history. A story of a global pandemic that's been hiding in plain sight for, believe it or not, a whole century.
So that line comes from T.S. Eliot's 1922 masterpiece, The Wasteland. And if you've ever tried to read it, you know it's notoriously difficult, right? It's this collage of broken images and voices that has haunted readers for over 100 years. And for pretty much that entire time, the official story about what all that brokenness means has been really, really clear.
For decades, the story we've all been taught in school is that this poem is about one thing, and one thing only: the trauma of the First World War.
You see, critics built this really powerful narrative connecting the poem's fragmented style to the ashes of World War I. The idea is that the shattered language reflects a shattered European civilization. And look, it's a compelling argument for sure. It's totally dominated how we understand the poem. But what if it's missing a huge piece of the puzzle? Because that focus on the war, it completely overlooks another global catastrophe that was happening at the exact same time. And this one infected a third of the entire planet's population.
Yeah, the 1918 Spanish flu. It killed tens of millions of people. And yet, unlike World War I, it's almost a ghost in our cultural history. Think about it. We have countless memorials for the war, but the pandemic? It was met with this profound, lasting silence. So the question is, why?
And this really gets to the heart of the problem. You know, war creates a narrative we can all rally around. There are heroes, there's sacrifice, there's a visible enemy you can point to. But a pandemic? That's a whole different beast. It's a private, internal battle. It's not a story of glorious sacrifice. It's a story of isolated tragedy. And that is so much harder for our collective memory to hold on to. Okay, so if the pandemic was culturally silenced, how in the world can we find it in this poem? Well, the clues, it turns out, aren't in the history books. They're actually in the poet's own life. The key to unlocking this whole new way of reading The Wasteland isn't buried in some dense literary theory. No. It's right there in T.S. Eliot's personal letters. Scholars went back to his mail from the years he was actually writing the poem, and honestly, what they found changes everything. And here's the first huge piece of evidence. Eliot wasn't just some distant observer of the pandemic. He was a direct victim. He and his wife, Vivian, both caught the flu during its absolutely devastating second wave. This wasn't just some footnote in his life. It was a constant, pressing reality for them. In fact, the experience got so deep into his head that he started using the language of the pandemic to describe his own troubled marriage. The virus literally seeped into his personal vocabulary, becoming a metaphor for his private suffering. And just listen to how specific he gets about the symptoms. He writes about extreme dryness and a bitter taste in the mouth. I mean, these aren't just abstract ideas, right? These are raw physical sensations. And as we're about to see, these exact sensations are woven all through his most famous poem.
So with all this context in mind, the poem's strange, disjointed language starts to look less like the shell shock of war and a lot more like something else entirely. It starts to sound like the rambling, broken logic of a body just consumed by sickness. And this leads us to a whole new way of understanding the poem's structure. Some people are calling it delirium logic. And the idea is that the poem isn't just randomly fragmented. No, it follows the exact pattern of a feverish mind. You know, jumping between thoughts, confusing what's real with what's a nightmare. The structure is the sickness.
All right, let's actually see how this new lens completely changes the poem. Take those super famous opening lines. For 100 years, they've been read as this big metaphor for the spiritual emptiness that came after the war. But if you look at it through a pandemic lens, it becomes chillingly literal. Some critics argue this is actually the point of view of a body buried in a mass grave, looking up from the ground, watching spring return to a world it can't be a part of anymore. Suddenly, it's not a metaphor. It's a straight-up horror story. Or how about this line from the end of the section called The Fire Sermon? The traditional take sees it through a Buddhist lens, right? A warning against earthly passion and desire. But now, think back to Eliot's letters. This is also the literal, physical experience of burning up with a high-grade fever, a terrifying, common symptom of the deadly flu. It's the feeling of your own body just turning against you. And what about this image? It's so visceral, So disturbing. It feels completely broken, like a mind just struggling to put a coherent thought together.
Well, this perfectly captures that extreme dryness Eliot wrote about in his personal letter. It's the physical agony of dehydration and the broken thoughts of a feverish mind translated directly into poetry. The fragmentation, you see, isn't just some artistic choice, it's a symptom.
So, what does this all mean? Well, reading the poem through this pandemic lens does way more than just offer a new, cool interpretation. It actually uncovers a hidden history. It reveals the poem as a kind of secret memorial. All of a sudden, the wasteland becomes a monument not just to a broken culture, but to broken bodies and fragmented minds suffering from a plague. It gives voice to an experience that history pretty much tried to forget. It captures the awful isolation of the sick room, the sheer terror of delirium. And, maybe the most powerful idea here is this. By not naming the pandemic directly, Eliot perfectly channeled the experience. The virus was this unspeakable trauma. It was haunting the culture, but nobody knew how to talk about it. So the poem itself becomes a memorial to that exact silence. And that brings the question right back to us, right now. What parts of our own recent experiences are going to be remembered, and what parts are going to be silenced? A century from now, when people look back at our time, what secret histories will they find buried in the art we're creating today?